question. Okay. If the students could come up and one at a time, please introduce yourself and question your answer. Okay. If you could say what you're studying here as well.
Sure. Hi, I'm Amira Hanafi, and I'm a student here in the MFA in Writing program. So, well, thank you for showing us the slides and giving us an introduction. That was really nice. When I first saw your work, the first thing that struck me after I was stopped laughing, which was very funny, was that it has a lot of parallels with concrete poetry. And so then I went and did some research and read up about definitions of concrete poetry, and for all practical purposes, it could be defined as concrete poetry. And I was just wanted to ask you why you choose not to define it that way.
Well, it could be partly out of ignorance that I am not a big student. I'm not a serious student of concrete poetry. So there are probably some aspects of it that I'm not aware of or don't know well enough where it probably fits in. And I do think it fits in some ways. But, I feel like it diverges from it in more ways than it is like it. So, and I do get that question a lot. I feel like it's, I don't know, I just feel like, it's maybe because I think of concrete poetry in association more with the printed page, where the page really becomes a frame, where, words are laid out to form, a certain structure. And you're probably saying, well, that's exactly what yours does. I just feel like that's not a priority, though. I think my purposes are to arrange text in a way that reveals something about their structure, but not about anything, whatever comes after that, any other layers are, I love for people to make other associations with it, but it's not my primary reason to arrange it just, for the sake of arrange. It has more to do with revealing something about the structure of language. And I think that's why I think it just has more to do with linguistics than with concrete poetry. However, I don't object that it's thought of that way at all. I mean, to me, and you could probably talk more about that.
I'm just wondering if it's a matter of economy. What economy you decide to place the work in. Had it been placed into a page-bound praxis, then in fact we would have to think of it as concrete poetry. But in fact, concrete poetry was never really meant to live in a physical environment. It was never really meant to live off the page. And often when it does move off the page, it fails terribly. I think that K, because it's invoking a physical space that's really dealing with issues of the body, I mean, letters off, it's really off the page. Even a drawing is rarely an 8.5 by 11 experience in her work. I believe that once you take something off the page and then throw it into a different economy, the economy of fine art, in fact, and we need to look at it as fine art. However, if she had only kept it on the page, then I think we would have to figure it as that. In that economy, it's flowing into that economy.
I guess as a follow-up to that, then, what would happen to your work if the language aspect of it were taken, if you took away the color and the material and the hanging on the wall, and you just put it on the page in a book? Like, I was thinking about your piece, Elvis, is it Elvis Lives? Like, what if we took those two words and just put them on the page? I mean, what do you think might be lost, or what do you think might be gained?
I think it's a case-by-case thing. I think Elvis could work on the page, just like Silence License could work on the page. But I think but some things really require the color, like blurs, say, or ivory on brown. They require color, some require scale. I think Onoa New Orleans 2005. I think the wall paintings are important because when you want the volume turned up on a message, when it's not such an intimate and private message, but more a public message, I think scale would be an important thing that you would lose on a page. So color, scale. In some cases, I think of them when you talk about the body, I think they are body-like in a way. First of all, I think the size of the paintings, it was hard to tell from there, and I really never described the size, but they were pretty much easel size, and they're sort of within the confines of the body, and they really, they are object-like. And so I think some would work. I mean, you imagine, like, Elvis lives in black and white on a page, and I don't know if everyone's seen that one, I didn't show it, but it's usually black text on a bright pink ground. You would lose sort of the context, which is sort of the 50s, these 50s colors. So I think something would be lost. I think more would be lost than gaining.
It'd be funny, it'd be like doing you could do a project where, you could do a project where you take all of Kay's texts and Xerox them or whatever, reduce it to a page, and do a little book and call it, Kay Rosen Unplugged. and see what happens.
Yeah, see what happens.
I personally think things would be lost, but I actually think new things would happen too.
Maybe.
When you take away a lot of the scale, the sensuousness, you're really left with words on a page. I think the language itself is. I think Mary agreed that the language itself is strong enough that it actually stripped down without the physicality, and without the color, would certainly be very powerful.
Well, thank you. I think it's a good idea. Maybe I'll do that. Thanks.
My name is Andrew Blackley. I'm a student here in the Media Department, and I'm curious about your print-based works. The way that you build the images, or the text rather, how it differs from that of the handmade, and also the processes and the framing that you employ. And also I'm curious about your titling, and how on your print-based works you don't include the titles. On bottoms, when we discussed how integral that your titles were, while it's not necessary, traditionally some people would expect it. I was just curious about that.
Okay, that's a lot of questions. So the first one is about printmaking?
The first one, yeah, about how you build the image.
A lot of the prints, as I said, are lists. There are a large amount of text that can't be accomplished by painting, or it'd be, it would be foolish. So when I do these lists, and I've done a lot of them, they work better in a print medium. I've done other prints that, are not lists, that work maybe because, like a print I did on letterpress, was for a letterpress master project, and it played with the rainbow backgrounds that letterpress uses sometimes, and it was rainbow wow or rainbow wow. But anyway, so it just sort of depends. It either has to do with printmaking, usually specifically, or it's a lot of text that is better done mechanically.
Sure. I was also going to ask if you've used letterpress before.
If I what?
I was going to ask if you've used letterpress before.
Yes. Not personally, but I've done 3 letterpress projects. Well, one that's about to be done. And I love the way it looks.
Would you consider your print-based works maybe hybridic between language and the visual in the manner they sit up on the page? Like as you're discussing the concrete poetry as being works on a page, would you consider them closer towards that?
Yes, I would, yes. And some of the print-based projects, some of the lists have actually been reproduced as, covers on, or in projects in some kind of a magazine, a journal or something, and I think they work fine.
I have one more.
Yep.
Are you creating your own fonts, or are you utilizing other fonts?
I'm utilizing existing fonts. Not that I would love to design a font, but I just haven't had time. So, but I use Usually, except for the sort of decorative period in 1994 where Aunt Bee was part of, most of the fonts are sans serifs. They're really simple fonts because I don't want the fonts to distract from other things, other issues in the painting. So I usually use just Futura or, just something very simple. It's sort of generic looking.
I did.
Was that everything?
About your titling with the...
The titles. Sometimes the titles are really important and they're like an extension of the piece, like sheep and wolf's clothing, or I can't think of any other examples. But sometimes they're just very, like...
I wish I knew my neighbor better.
Yes, that's an important one. But sometimes the titles are just the name of the piece, like Tidbit was Tidbit, and Torsos Rocks, Torsos Rocks. So, there's nothing very exciting about them.
Let me follow up on the idea of multiples with you. I mean, I think these things would make great T-shirts. Coffee cups, mouse pads. No, seriously, I mean, I can, they're so sort of iconic in a way, and I mean, in a powerful way, because actually the work always has a political and social message in it. It's not simply formal, so that in a sense, there's sort of all these other venues of mass production getting to screensavers. I mean, have you done anything out there?
I have, there's a company in New York called Photofolio. Do you know them? Photofolio. They make T-shirts for artists' work, and they sell them to museum stores and stuff like that. And they have done a lot of my T-shirts, actually. And I have this new project. I just had a flood in my studio, and I decided I needed to get rid of a lot of stuff. So I have all these T-shirts that I'm now giving away. So if anyone wants to come try them, because they gave me like 15 of every T-shirt they made. So there are all these,
Where were they available?
They're available. See, Photofolio, I think, is like a wholesale. They sell to like museum stores or something, I guess. You could go to their website and try to find out, I guess. If they actually sell them. I don't know. I should find out.
Have you ever collaborated?
But I love to do postcards,
Have you collaborated with a fashion designer?
No. Not that I can remember.
So have you done postcards?
I've done some postcards.
Coffee cups?
Not coffee cups. I haven't yet. I did a screensaver. Camel cigarettes. What were these? Philip Morris commissioned me to do the screensaver. Unfortunately, it was so long ago, it only came in a floppy. So like no one can, you can actually download it from my website, I think. There's a screensaver thing there under the index.
My name is Polina Zayantz. I'm in the Visual Communications Department, and as I have a background in theater. Since coming to this school, when I see art that the intent is to be funny and there's humor involved, and this, talking about the coffee cups and screensavers and such, my interpretation is that when something is funny, it isn't taken as seriously, or it isn't as valid to some people, and I just want to hear your argument of why it is.
I feel that I agree with you. I think things that are funny are not taken as seriously and aren't given as much importance as more serious subjects. I don't have much of a defense. It would just be that I think there's more, sometimes, I feel there's more in the work, other people sometimes feel there's more in the work besides just the humor. The humor is sort of the thing that comes, sometimes it's, ha-ha funny. I think I talked about that in the interview. Sometimes it's just the kind of humor that comes as when you're surprised, you don't expect something, it's like, aha, that kind of funny. But, I think language being language, that there are other payoffs besides that. And I think it's sort of, up to the viewer whether they receive that more out of it than just that. But I'm not sure if that quite answers your question. I really don't know how to defend that I think it's as valid as more serious work. But that's not to say that humor is not serious either. You know, I think a lot of serious issues can be addressed through humor. So I don't know, probably not a very good answer, but
No, it is. I mean, and I think it absolutely. I disagree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, with theater, comedy and tragedy go hand in hand. So
Right.
it seems like for art, it's just serious. It has to be serious. But that leads to when you create text for a piece, do you deliberately make a choice to set out for a specific mood or comedic mood, or does it just come to you during the process? And then also, have you created any pieces where there's so many layers to the text, and do you discover things where all of a sudden you've made the piece and you know that there are all these I don't know, when it's up, do you see something where you didn't see it before?
well, the first part of that, the humor, is usually something that comes with it. I don't go looking for it. It's usually the thing that recommends itself to the piece to me. So it's already like comes with the territory. And the other layers or associations, yes, sometimes I think of them, but like so much I've learned from other people who, because I can sort of get stuck in a certain way of looking at it, and then I find that other people will suggest other layers to me or other associations that I'm just like amazed that I haven't seen it. For example, that word called six, it said Twombly, Tworkov, two men. To me, originally, that was only about spacing and reading. That two men read like Twoman. After you say Tworkov and Twombly, you say Twoman because there was no space in between. It was just about reading. And someone who wrote about that work discovered, not I, that it was really, there were these female words embedded in it, which I didn't even see. I mean, it's just amazing, right? Because it seems so obvious. So I've incorporated it into my time.
Along those lines, what humorous artist works do you admire? Maybe some examples of artists or works that you find interesting.
Some of Richard Prince's jokes. And gosh, well, see, I thought Cheryl Donegan is, can I say, Kenny's wife, who's a wonderful artist, and she did this fabulous piece, and she's a wonderful artist. And but some years ago, the piece that I just thought was so funny was a work she did in which she sat her bare buttocks in green paint and made a print with it by moving around in 4 places on paper of a shamrock. And to me, that was very, I just thought that it's some combination of wit and humor and like getting at something that's, it's just that, it's just so unique and that no one would ever have ever thought of. It's just so fresh. And I can't think of anybody else right now, but I'm sure, it's usually the thing that clinches.
I think there's something that's very funny about the work because the work doesn't read funny. It's really austere.
Mm-hmm.
It's not humorous. I remember years ago, Larry Johnson, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
Those texts with those funny colors, and it was all, very decorative and very humorous. But I think one of the strengths of your work is the fact that it reads very austerely, very serious.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's this layer of humor which kind of creates a sort of tension in the work.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that if you used funnier fonts, the work would just kind of slide off the wall into a, pile of jello, so to speak? Is there a tension and there's a rigor and a tension in your attention to typography that holds the humor in check by the austerity of the typographical treatment?
I think that's very likely. I think that's a really good point. I think that's very possible. And I guess maybe also the economy of the work does that there's only like a few words, it's never more than 3, maybe. And I don't know, maybe, and there's something, I'm a big believer in really painting or drawing works well. I think there's a certain authority in, doing things. I'm just one of those, anal perfectionists that has to have every line straight. So maybe there's something about that authority that, from the way it's physically done, that also keeps it a little austere. I'm not sure.
As it will. Well, also, it's supposed to say hand painting.
Yeah.
I mean, have you, well, I guess the Mexican one, was there
Yeah,
some?
yeah, that was based on a cartoon I drew and then enlarged,
But
yeah.
you've never would Jessica Diamond style, you know,
No,
try
I
to
cannot.
do this. What would be,
Couldn't do that.
why wouldn't you do that?
I just don't think I'd be happy with it.
Do you think it would undercut the seriousness of the work, or do you think that,
It's
what
just
would
not
happen
me.
if the forest here was in fact painted without free form by you?
I don't know if it'd work as well. There's something maybe about the neutrality that is created when it's sort of done in a formal way that keeps it in a certain place, kind of rigidly in a certain place, and allows you to enter and move around in it, maybe. I actually have never thought about that before. I think it's a really interesting question.
I'm thinking
But maybe
about,
maybe that's it. Maybe it just becomes too loose and too, maybe it needs to hold its own place and be very formal.
I'm thinking about what happens with Warhol's celebrity portraits in the 70s, whereas the original Warhols were just screened and not touched and just no hand at all. And as the time went on, he began to get more and more decorative, using looser brush strokes, quote, expressionistic brush strokes that in a way, really undermined the rigor of his practice.
Right.
Perhaps while pleasing the client, because the client is paying so much money for these portraits, they want a little bit of the artist's hand in this. It wasn't a sly thing. The artist's hand. How does the artist's hand?
I know. There's no artist's hand here.
No, but there is. You hand paint these.
I do hand paint these, yes.
So there is
I
an
do
artist's
hand paint
hand,
them
but it's
all.
a suppressed artist's hand.
Yes, it is. It is.
But it's a
I mean,
beautiful
I
thing.
admire that in other artists. I wish I could be Jessica Diamond and go in and just paint this huge dollar sign on a wall, or some of
Carrie
the,
Leewitz.
or Carrie, exactly, Carrie Leewitz, who's another very funny artist, who's also goes by the name of Candy Ass. But I just don't think I can. I may have made a few stabs at it.
We've got a few things. We've got some coffee cups.
We have some lists
Unplugged.
unplugged.
We were unplugged, black and white, and now some hand painting.
So we need to be
We're actually
here in a
here to
year.
brainstorm today. Okay, so next question. Any other students?
I'm not a student, but I
Please.
am a student. I'm Ashley. Hi. I'm a art history, theory, and criticism student. And I was wondering, have you ever thought about using different languages with your work? And like kind of not learning the language, but just using it strictly as the letters would be and things like this, and finding out maybe what would happen.
Well, I have used other languages, but only ones I know. I feel like if I didn't, or languages that I don't know, but just real bare, like I've done a piece with using 9, 10, using NEIN like German, but just like really basic words. I feel like without the meaning, if I didn't know the meaning, I would be a little helpless. But I have used other languages, like they're.
When you say work in Germany,
Uh-huh.
has the work ever been translated? Have you Chinese, German? I mean, when you do a show in Korea or something,
Yeah.
do you use English?
I haven't done a show in Korea, but when I do a show, in France or Germany, Switzerland, Netherlands. I mean, well, they speak. So many people speak English in Western Europe that it usually isn't a problem. But also, because the works are so brief, they can be looked up in a dictionary, and anyone, even if they don't speak English, can probably find the meaning of them. The thing that suffers, though, is like the cultural implications that we get, here, that we know here, that they aren't aware of. Things are read into it, like, well, tidbit. I don't know if tidbit is a word that they would use. I mean, you could probably
Just
look
an
it up.
expression.
Yeah, or
But say the word tidbit,
Uh-huh,
or the German equivalent was here in the Art Institute.
uh-huh.
I mean, you would be completely lost.
You
with
wouldn't
that.
be.
You would, of course you would be.
Oh, you would be?
Sure.
Wait, if you were German and so.
No, if a German artist came here and painted a German slogan on our wall here,
Yes,
without a translation,
Right.
without a piece of paper saying what that thing meant,
yes.
we'd look at it and we'd go, what?
I know, and then it has to offer something else.
So
I mean,
then,
then maybe you'd see that it's just mirror images, you don't have to know what the word is. I mean, the word isn't so crucial to that piece. I mean, it is a little word, it's a tidbit of language, but I'm not sure how important that is. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a little problematic. Blurred was done, the image here wasn't, this image was at the MCA in Chicago, but I did do it in Germany at a gallery, and it, they could probably read it, but at the time it was done, which was in 2004, we had this blue-red political thing raging, and still do. And even though I don't really want it to be read that way, to me it's about like two sides of anything that's going to sort of come together. But in the United States, that's how a lot of people read it. In Germany, it wasn't an issue. I mean, it wasn't. So I just think some cultural nuance is lost in other countries.
Yeah, and also about a little comment about the text. If you were to actually use like a hand, like a kind of like signature, I think I would concentrate more on what your handwriting looks like and more about what it's about, like the actual word. So I think I'm a little bit more happier with this kind of text, because if I saw like your handwriting, I'd start thinking about like your hand.
You mean, you prefer this
Yeah.
to a more casual?
Yeah, if it was like your actual handwriting.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking.
So you're on the side of like keeping the formal.
Yeah, and I'm usually not. And I'm usually
We're gonna
not,
keep
so that's
score.
the thing. But yeah, because I think more about the meaning of the word
Yeah.
instead of how you write the meaning of the word.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is part of it too, yeah. I think when it's hand done, it's something else coming in that is not important
Yeah.
to it.
English. Have you thought of working in other languages in those countries specifically, working with somebody that could either translate the work or actually create some new works using, say Japanese kanji?
Yeah, I would love to do that. I haven't really had an opportunity, I don't know, somehow, the shows I've done have just sort of, it's been work, maybe they've seen in New York, and they want to transport it to their country, and it's really closed. It's like, you don't, that's it, you're not going to do anything else. So.
Do you feel that working in English limits your career as an artist?
Oh, maybe. Do you think so? Maybe.
I'm not sure. I think that.
It might.
The painting, the image, reads across, internationally. We get back to concrete poetry again and again, one of the political thrusts behind concrete poetry was a transnational language. That, in other words, that you can actually read a poem in not knowing that language, but if you had a key to understanding the very simple things that were going on the page, then in fact you would be able to actually read and write poetry that could be understood transnationally. So yeah, I think that it's a very utopian mid-century idea, Esperanto sort of an idea. But Esperanto, say, could you do a whole show in Esperanto?
That would be great. I don't know Esperanto, but I can learn it.
Of course, that was the idea was that anybody could learn it. I mean, really, that's because
That's a great
Esperanto
idea.
is a multidimensional reverberatory
It's just no one really
space.
speaks Esperanto, do they?
But of course they don't. But of course everybody would be able to really understand it, even though it's a failed utopian system.
Yeah. But I mean, I'd probably have more success in English. I mean, but then like when you think, like Lawrence Weiner he does do some work in say German or Dutch. Ed Ruscha does not really that I'm aware of work in other languages. I don't think Jenny Holzer does. I'm trying to think of language artists who are limited to just limit their practice to English.
Some more questions?
My name is Mike Avella. I'm an MFA student here at the Institute in Writing, and I was actually going to ask you a question about language and language shifting, but after getting to know you the last couple of weeks and hearing you today, I wanted to ask you something different, and I hope this doesn't sound generic, because I don't intend it to be, but how often do you keep an audience in mind when putting a piece or pieces together? You know,
Keep what in mind?
an audience?
Oh, uh-huh.
Or is there an audience? Or, I guess, why do you care if people come to see your work?
Well, I think every artist cares because, you are you do want to communicate something to an audience, but although I think we also do it for ourselves, don't we? I think we do both. But I do keep an audience in mind more, and I think it's important to try to gauge how someone reads your work and how they come to it, because when an artist works, you get very kind of close to it. It's really like not seeing the forest for the trees. It's hard to judge how well it communicates what you want to say to a viewer. So I think it's important. It's important to me to try to get it, not just to satisfy myself, but to get it to a point where there's some clarity and economy and directness, focus, so that it will be accessible, not to the point where you compromise it to make it, like the lowest common denominator or anything like that, but to make it, to just be honest and make your views, what you want to communicate really clear. So a long time ago, the work I did, I think really expected the audience to sort of meet me. I come 75% of the way, and for me, I think I would prefer to go, meet them halfway. So I think it's important, and I think it's something that, it's a balance, it's like striking this balance. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
I think along those lines, I think the works would be delightful to live with, sort of in day in and day out. I mean, how is it to live with your works?
I don't have too many up, but and you know how it is when you have something and you don't notice it after a while. But it doesn't they don't annoy me, the ones I have up. At the very worst, I just don't notice them after a while. But I enjoy living with them. They're sort of a test of time. Sometimes you see work that you just think, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. It's so awful. How could I have let that out of my studio? And then, I don't know, sometimes you look at that very same work and just say, gee, that wasn't so bad, and I'm glad I didn't destroy it like I wanted to,
Do you do commissions for people's homes? I mean, does a collector want a big wall painted?
They're difficult. I mean, I've done a couple, like 2. That's it. Mostly they're public, for, a museum will buy something. They don't have it up all the time. They'll just, have the record of it, and they can put it up whenever they want.
So they'll reconstruct the work on occasion and tear it down.
Right. So I'll give them all the plans for doing it, and they'll do it. But I haven't there. It's a big commitment, although I don't think it's such a big deal for people to paint something on their walls. And and then if they move or they get tired of it, they can just paint it over and they can repaint it at another time, another place. But I think people are very resistant. I think they're much more partial to having the object. But I think that, it also depends on the artist. Like Saul LeWitt, I'm sure he has commissions on. He can't keep up with them all. And he has crews, that go and do these.
But one doesn't paint over a solid wall.
One doesn't. One shouldn't. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe his are mostly public too. I'm sure they're, just exorbitantly expensive now too.
Do you think about Saul LeWitt in terms of your wall works? Is that somebody you're sort of kind of in your mind wrestling with?
No, but I do love his wall works. Yeah, I think they're great. The only thing I think about, I just am envious that he does have this crew that go and do these works, you know, and just wherever they're needed. It's really wonderful to have that, something like that in place. I think I probably, I think about Lawrence Weiner. Are you familiar with his work? He just spoke here last week, and but he is a person who does wall works, and there have been wall paintings, but lately I noticed he's been using vinyl a lot, which I'm really a little disappointed about.
What's wrong with that?
I think they're probably very efficient. You don't have to depend on like a sign painter, and sign painters who can do these are like hen's teeth. There really aren't too many of them. And those, like, I don't know if you know Arturo Herrera's work. Do you know his work? He does a lot of wall paintings, and there are just a few painters. There's one in LA, there's one in Chicago, fortunately, who just do beautiful, you know, they're sign painters, but they do these beautiful, they're used to working for artists and museums. In fact, the one in LA, Norm Lage, he actually executes a lot of Sari's work and Larry Pittman's work, those smaller works on canvas. So, but there aren't too many people like that. They're like, you know, old craftsmen.
You're sounding very romantic.
Oh, yes.
The hand, the old sign, the craft, the sign. That's surprising coming from somebody who would do seemingly hands-off, you know, somewhat austere work. So I'm curious about the emotionalism and the attachment to certain more ideas of convention. What do you think of you that way?
I think, no, it is important to me, like the mural tradition, you know, and the fresco tradition, and, you know, painting on a wall, you know, as a historical model. That is important, and I'd always rather, you know, go with paint than vinyl. Sometimes it's, you know, you have to do it, but I don't think it looks as good. It doesn't look as rich. And it doesn't mean the same thing. Materials mean something.
Hi, my name is Jack Gems. I'm in the MFA writing program. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about the idea of language as a found material. And in relation to that, I was also wondering if there's ever been an instance where you didn't feel you had the authority to take on a certain language or rearrange it, work with it.
You mean because of like copyright issues, or what kind of issues? I mean, what would keep you? What would prevent? Well, I'll try to answer that without. I mean, I was just trying to think like what would keep me from feeling that I had the authority. But maybe it's because of the nature of the found language, so I'll answer that first.
Or maybe certain ways of turning language around or manipulating it?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I do think of the work as found language. There, you know, sometimes things just pop into my head. Sometimes I just read something. Sometimes it's a bit of conversation I overhear. It comes to me in different ways, but it's always found. You know, it's always something that exists out there that I just sort of pluck out of the air, out of the, you know, atmosphere, because there's something about it that I feel I could, you know, want to do something with. And usually, though, because it's so anonymous, I don't feel like it's off limits to me. So I don't know if that is quite what you're asking about, you know, but I can't remember a time. I mean, the only time I would feel that way is if it was, you know, if I was, you know, like plagiarizing or, you know, lifting language from an author, you know, where it had already been authored. I haven't done that so that I can remember, so like maybe that would be an issue.
What about copyrighted language? What about, you know, language, commercial language? Would that prevent you, the fear of using that, getting sued, perhaps? Proprietary language? The words you use seem to always be in the public domain, except for Ivory L. Brown.
I know.
And I asked you at lunch, what would Ivory think if
I know.
she knew you were
I'm afraid to meet Ivory.
putting her name
I know.
against people
I
without
know.
permission. No, I think it's.
I don't know what would happen. I
Perhaps
don't
your
know if
question
that's
is-
like grounds for a lawsuit.
Is it ethical? I mean, is it a question about ethics? Because I think when one works with language, that one assumes a certain, must take a certain ethical position, stance either for, against, or completely ignoring the idea of ethics in language.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, have you ever used the word Coca-Cola?
No, I've used cocoa.
Oh,
Cocoa. I have, but it's not a.
Do you purposely shy away? Would the meaning and the connotations of the word Coca-Cola be anyway too limiting as to what it could possibly do for your work anyway? I mean, when
Yeah.
something is that prescribed, it doesn't have the openness and the fluidity of normative language.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's nothing about that word right now that interests me, so I'm not tempted. But I can't think of any like copyrighted word right now that would be off limits.
Sally Alto, class, and I wanted to ask you a follow-up. What would be an example of language that is not found?
Gosh. I don't know. I mean, language, it all exists. So it is all found. Some of it is, and it's all kind of generic, there's nothing about it that, I mean, there are some proper names like Machoria or Noah or Elvis. I mean, there are some proper names, but the non-proper names they exist as language, so they're all found. I mean, I think. Do you have another take on that? Yeah, because I can't think of anything that isn't. And getting back to the copyright issue, I actually have tried to copyright Pi, the ABCDEF, because I had this like running battle with the Copyright Office, the Library of Congress, and they would not copyright it because it was too, it was generic as an alphabet. And even though I wanted to copyright it, as an artwork in a certain, in that way, they would not do it.
Wait a minute, why did you want to copyright it?
I don't know. There was a point where it was just so, in so many, in retrospect, it was kind of a silly idea. But in 1997,
were you feeling that somebody would use that in an ad campaign and
you never
would
know, yeah.
get credited?
Mm-hmm. Well, you always hear about Art Indiana's experience with the Love, blocks, and how he never copyrighted it, and he never, it was made into stamps and, mugs and key rings and all kinds of stuff, and he never got a penny. And not that mine would ever, enjoy that kind of success, but, that I think that is like the example that everybody thinks of. I mean, in Love, it was just love, So anyway, he probably couldn't have copyrighted it even if he wanted to. So anyway, I just wanted to copyright it. It was really out in the public for a while. It was, in a lot of different locations. And it was a t-shirt, it was a button, it was a billboard, it was a building, it was a wall, it was in New Zealand, it was in Australia, it was in Philadelphia, it was in California. It was just all over the place. And it was like, I don't know, I just got a little like, maybe I should protect this. But anyway, it didn't happen.
This is maybe a little bit different, and I'm not aware, maybe you have, but have you ever used someone's name that is still living in your work?
Yeah, Ivory Brown.
But someone that's in the
famous.
public sphere, yeah.
I did. Well, yeah, I did a bumper sticker. Yeah, about Bush. What else? Let's see. Yeah, that's how much I can think of. And then that was sort of, it kind of came in through the back door.
Okay.
history theory comes in. And my question is just how maybe outside perceptions of your work, we've already kind of mentioned this one with the workroom, but how maybe that affects how you see your work. And if also as being formally trained in linguistics and not art, maybe how you view kind of the art history canon and that plays into your work.
You mean coming to it from another place? Yeah. I think it was probably, I felt very self-conscious for years that I didn't come to it through art and didn't go through all the formal, rigorous training, networking, all the kind of stuff that art students go through. But I think it's actually probably good that I came to it from that way, and it was probably undiluted and uncontaminated by a lot of our world issues, maybe. I'm not sure. I mean, it's interesting. It could have been different in a better way. It could have, maybe would have been, a positive thing. I don't know. But I do think it came, I did have to learn a lot on my own, and it made it all a little more difficult. But I think basically I was able to develop it in a way that was probably maybe more pure and maybe more focused. It just came out of that certain place.
Is your work, you came from academia, is your work ever discussed or received by, say, linguistic journals in academia? Have there been critical pieces written about your work from an academic linguistic standpoint?
No.
Or even Freudian, slips of the tongue, certainly.
Yeah. No, no one has, except, do you know who Steven Pinker is? He's a linguist, and he's written a lot of books, and he's sort of a big authority on linguistics in a certain theory, which right now honestly can't think of what it was, but he did talk about my work in conjunction with the show I did at the MIT, the List Gallery at MIT, and I wasn't there for it, and the person who was supposed to record it screwed up, and I never heard it. So that's the only case I know of that I can remember where someone's talked about it in a more academic.
It would seem there could be a virtual industry in linguistics of commenting on your work.
Well, I think they just don't know about my work, Don't you think? I think they're just not aware of it. Because how many linguists or academicians really are involved in the visual arts? Or probably not many. We're not talking about that, like there's this big divide, even within, the same.
But it seems like your work in terms of slippage, reverberation, there's also socioeconomic, I would imagine that an academic community would have a field day with it.
I would be wonderful. I would love that. But I don't think anyone, is aware of it.
Do you have another question?
I'm Tiffany Slade, an MFA writing student, background in painting. And originally when I viewed your works, I was impressed by the visuals of just certain words put together and the sounds of them, and I put the words together in my head and pronounced them a lot. But listening to you speak, I heard a lot more about the meaning behind them. I had a lot of aha moments, and so I could really appreciate the width. So I just wondered what drives you. Is it the meaning more, or the visual, or the sounds, or a combination of all three?
Good question. I think it always begins with the language, just the language itself, the physical language, and its structure, and the potential that it has to reveal some sort of message or something else that exceeds what it's ostensibly about. That it can, you can kind of draw more out of it by, through something within the system, its structure, and usually that's where it begins. And as you can tell, it's a little microcosm. The things that make the difference are little phonemes, letters, sometimes punctuation, just really small events. So that's where it starts, and then sometimes the color just is part of it, like blurred or ivory brown. I mean, it just, you know, goes hand in hand with it, and you can't separate it. Sometimes it's, you know, layered on top. Sometimes it's like, well, what do I do with this in terms of color? You know, like queen bee. I mean, bees are yellow and black. I mean, you know, it's like, so that usually comes later. I would say it just always starts with the, you know, with the structure. But the humor is really important, and that's always closely involved with it. And a lot of times, a work will have, you know, maybe some potential. I'll work on it. I'll think, oh, there's something here. And usually when a work fails, I think I mentioned this in the interview that I think some of you read, it's because there's a lack of humor, or just something that's missing. It's like, doesn't have that kind of enlightened moment.
Can I ask you about the process of your work, the genesis of things? I mean, for example, you know, the ivory L brown. Did you go out searching for a word? I mean, do you search for words? Do you carry a notepad around with you when you see something from the train? How do the words, how are they born?
Different ways. That one I think Sally had asked me, how did I, and I don't think I ever answered that. I think I just discovered it accidentally. I wasn't looking for names in a phone book that, you know, however, I did find a name in some phone book that her name was Olive Green. Isn't that amazing? But but I just discovered it. It was like, oh my gosh, I have to use this. And so I cut it out, and I did a collage with it, and that didn't quite satisfy me. And it really wasn't until because I was just using ivory brown, but it was when I realized that the middle initial L was in there, and that was sort of the key that brought it together, because that's, you know, then you start thinking, well, what does the L stand for? So anyway, sometimes they just come to me in the middle of the night, sometimes it's something I'm reading, and they just come about in different ways.
Do you keep a file?
I do keep a little notebook.
Of potentials or failures, you know, of a little language, you know, a little language file.
Yeah, I have a little notebooks, you know, and I'll just jot down things just mainly so I don't forget them, you know, or because like, oh, you know, this has some possibilities, and then I'll revisit it, you know, maybe even if it doesn't turn into something right then. But
and then just taking that a little bit further, once you've decided on using something, and that you feel that it's got the linguistic reverberations, then how does that get translated into its physical manifestation? How does one thing become a wall piece and another one becomes a painting? You know, how does one thing have a serif type? Actually, maybe you don't use serif types.
no, I was just saying, just that little. There were a few years where I did, yeah.
You dropped serif type also.
Well, I only picked it up at like around the early 90s for some reason. I don't know why. I just wanted something a little more decorative where the font suited the subject. And maybe it was because of the subjects kind of called for that.
Do you find yourself going back to the same font again and again?
Yeah.
What's your favorite?
I do. Well, you know, now I'm using this font that Ivory Brown and Onoa was done in, and also that one called Taking Charge, the colored pencil drawing.
This one, yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of one of these odd fonts. It's not a you know, a font that people use a lot. But I just like it because it has a lot of straight lines. It's very blocky, and I don't know. It's sort of easy to paint, and I don't know. It's been a good font for me. I don't know how much longer I'll use it, but it's been, you know, I like it a little better than say a Gothic, like English Gothic or Frankfurt Gothic, which is more rounded. Or there's one called Billboard, which is more rounded, but it also it's similar to that. I don't know, kind of like it. I've been using this for a while. Actually, maybe I'll change.
What font is it?
It's called, I hate the name of it. It's called Commander, which I hate to admit it. It's just such a terrible name. But,
Do you lay them out on the computer? Is that?
yes, well, I start out by doing little drawings, you know, just in pencil, and kind of like just exploring and seeing, you know how to best do it. And then I do it on the computer, and I don't know, it's a and then when I actually finalize it, then I just print it out and lay it out on paper, so it's just like a layout, and then, you know, stretch my canvas, make my canvas, and just lay it on and transfer it with,
How do you transfer it?
with that graphite paper, like carbon paper, you know, and it comes in black and it comes in red, yellow, blue, and white. And so technically it's really kind of simple. I just tape the layout onto the canvas after I've, you know, done the background and everything, put the carbon paper, the graphite paper in between, and just transfer it on. And you take the paper off, and then you have your kind of like ghost, your, you know, little drawing on there, and then just paint it. And
Let me ask you a
and so
question.
and the straight sides I mask,
Yeah.
and the curves I paint freehand.
Okay. Are the colors decided on the computer beforehand?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. You know, but before, I mean, for a long time, I didn't do that. I just did them in black and white. And then when I got a color printer, I could actually, which is really only about 3 years ago, that I started printing them out in color. So, and it's helpful. It's definitely helpful to have to do it in color.
So we have another question or two. How many more questions do we have to go? Okay.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Beverly Nelson, and I'm a graduate from the MFA in Writing program. And I'm very intrigued with the idea of using words and letters that were made to be spoken, and that kind of relate that back to us as we read them. And the idea, your use of color. And if you have ever thought of doing a reading of your work, and what would that be like? And I'm kind of egging on a little bit, hopefully a discussion between the two of you.
About doing a reading? Well, the colors, some of them are, you know, just sort of like the work suggests itself. Sometimes it's a little more arbitrary. What else besides the reading thing?
I guess the way to ask you is, when you think of the colors, are you thinking of sounds of the words as well? And when you think of color, do you think of sound? I mean, does yellow have a particular relationship to sound?
No, it has a relationship to volume, though, like I said. And like, you know, oh Noah, you know, it needed to be loud, I thought, color-wise. And, but, you know, I have a I use these sign paints that are restricted. I mean, they just have a certain palette. You know, you could mix colors, but I don't like to mix. I like to use them straight out of the can because, you know, then if you have to go back and touch up, you're sunk. I mean, you know, so I like to use just the pure color. And there's a great range, you know, but it's still not as if you could just mix these colors. Like for Ivory Brown, we use latex on the walls. We usually try to use latex. And then you can get, you know, there's a larger selection. But I'm trying to think, sound. No, I mean, like Trippney's, it's like browns and pinks. It had more to do with the body. Sometimes, no, I don't think it relates to sound too much, except, like I said, volume maybe.
I think this piece up here, the chance and change, the only way to read that would be two voices reading simultaneously at the same time.
Yeah.
That would be it.
And it'd be so short.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So you could do like a series. Is this the number 4 that we're going to work on? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like they're a little bit too short, and I mean, I don't know how you do something. Like, how would you do Trippney's? You know, what would you do with Kelly's? It's such a visual thing. You know, that they have this pictorial function rather than an audio function.
You know, I think Beverly, it's an interesting question, because I actually think that Kay's body of work would be a great piece to give to a composer. composer to realize in sound. I mean, we don't know how to do such things.
Yeah.
But for example, if you do trichnies, they could do an oral equivalent, say bones, bones cracking. So they say trick. And then you say, something in the background that we don't know how to do simply with a reading. But I think a composer could actually work with these somebody who actually would know how to articulate these things.
Yeah,
Even though they're very small.
I mean, there is something performative about them, I think in the systems and kind of the movement. And, but I think if anything, they could be translated into movement or dance, I think, in a way, more easily than sound.
Didn't you say one of, would you
I did.
repeat that?
Well, it was, someone asked me one of those questions, if you had a chance to work with anyone from history, collaborate with someone, who would you collaborate with? And so the people I wanted to collaborate with were either is it Reich or Reich, the composer, who has this works with sort of systems, and one of my favorite composers. And I think of him, and he and Kenny is so bound up. Their work is, I don't know.
He is really wonderful.
He's wonderful. You too. I mean, they're, really just together. And then the others were dancers like Lucinda Childs and Trisha Brown, and these were choreographers from really the 70s, whose work is just, fabulous. It just kind of takes certain forms and mutates. They just sort of go through these phases and, then come back to a certain point. And the way they mutate, and they do according to systems, is just fascinating to me. I mean, so I don't know, it'd have to be a very specific piece, but I could see, actually, I mean, even Steve Reich, maybe, he was one of the people, that's sound person.
Yeah. There was a great
It
collaboration.
would be a starting point. They would be like the starting point, and then continue it on from there. The system.
Yeah, a really famous collaboration from '79. That was Philip Glass solo with Lucinda Childs. Post-Einstein on the Beach.
Yes.
But much more bare bones structural.
So
that Louis did the decor and Childs was doing these geometric permutations. And of course the Philip Glass music sort of goes somewhere and never really goes anywhere else.
Right. Yeah. But Kenny, I mean, you and Steve Reich, and those choreographers too. The way you work with systems.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
We love systems.
Okay.
So last question.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Tinger. I'm a painter and a cartoonist. I wasn't familiar with this piece until this slide lecture, this 4 Seasons of the Suburban. It was a found cartoon, found in the New Yorker. Well, it's interesting, we were talking about language appropriation, but we didn't talk about image appropriation.
Oh,
This is
right. I did call the New Yorker, and I said, do I need permission to reproduce this?
Right.
It was pretty easy. They said, no big deal. I couldn't believe it. They sent me I think I sent a written request, and they just sent me like a form thing back saying, fine.
So the image
And I said,
belonged to the New
his
Yorker.
name, I forgot who the cartoonist was now. But anyway, I said, he'll be credited, of course, in any kind of literature, about it.
That's really
Yeah, but I did go through a formal thing to get that. I just didn't, know what the rules were for that.
And I had one other small question, or it might be a big one, I don't know. How do you choose which works of yours are going to be presented in the public, like the AIDS bus ad, that was like a project, or the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I billboard, versus like, it seems to me like the Oh Noah piece begs to be like public art rather than gallery art. How do you make that decision?
Well, the AIDS piece was actually, I did for that project. I hadn't done it before that, so they asked me to do something for a public venue, and that for this project, Art Against AIDS on the Road. So it was some road thing, like a bus There were train stations, artists could choose. So that was done for that, definitely to be a public piece. High was, it just seemed like a public piece. All its venues have been, I mean, it's been done as an interior wall piece, but I just don't think, it's as effective. And, what was going on?
I was just wondering if you had any plans
Oh,
to...
no.
Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to do that as a public piece, it's just there hasn't been an opportunity. But no, I think it would be great. I don't know where you would do it. I mean, New Orleans, you don't really need to do it in New Orleans. They're so aware of the problem. It seems it needs to be done like in Washington, D.C. or something, the capital of the White House.
Well, I think it's something we really haven't touched on much is the political and social underpinnings of the work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so present. I think one of the misconceptions about Kay's work could be that it's merely formal, it's merely wordplay, it's just fun with letters. But seriously, I mean, I think that could, a cursory reading of your work, I think would be able to dismiss it immediately.
Yeah.
And yet, can you comment on the yet?
I'm a very political person, so I welcome with open arms work. If it works out with the other requirements, the list of it all. I embrace that. It's really important to me. And of course, you just saw a small amount of work. There are an awful lot of works that are, very political, and and I think, and some are political, have to do with feminism, some are political that have to do with, war, some are political that have to do with class. There are, and some of them are, it sort of is a subjective thing. They're not like, they don't scream, but I think it's sort of up to the person, the viewer, to kind of create the meaning.
Is that viewer participation part of a political or social mechanism in the work? Feeling that in order for the works to be invoked, that the viewer needs to be involved in some way, as opposed to, say, a more propagandistic attitude like with Barbara Kruger, where basically it's the Kruger's screaming down at you.
Right,
Is
that's
there
right.
a social engagement that you're referring to in the work of a purposeful social engagement between the viewer and the work that could be some sort of a model of empowerment?
Well, I think that it does require more viewer involvement, because a lot of them have to be figured out. They're not just there as a slogan. I think they have to sort of be figured out. So and sometimes there's time involved, like the palimpsest that has all the popes and the kings that are the 10th, except for Malcolm X. I mean, there's this time thing as you go down the list, and then you get to the bottom, and I think it's pretty evident, what that's about. But it's sort of like you have to invest yourself in it to read it through to get to that point. And the AIDS work, I think, is pretty evident, the AIDS poster. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think, as opposed to Kruger, who does really just is more didactic, I think. But there are other issues involved with hers, but...
No, I mean, the question really is the active participation of the viewer in the work that the viewer has to do and actually jump into the work in order to invoke the work, a form of social engagement for you?
Is their involvement in the work a social engagement part for me?
Yeah. Is your work doing a sort of work by asking the viewer to step into it and construct?
Yes, it is.
And does that construction in some way, socially or politically or aesthetically, empower that viewer?
Empower the viewer? Well, I think that...
By being active instead of passive.
I think it does. I think it does. I think it always empowers the viewer to be actively engaged in work, whether it's political or not, don't you think?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think.
Well, I think Kruger doesn't, you know. I mean, Kruger speaks out. You ask participatory.
That's true. That's a
You
very
ask
good
both
point.
of yours.
Very good point.
It's an activist approach.
Yeah. Like the bumper sticker, the push one. It goes, have you seen it? The bumper sticker? You have. So you know what I'm talking about. It doesn't, it's not like, you sort of have to get, you know, you don't like get it like that. But, you know, when you see B-U-S-H, but then you have 2 blocks after the B-U and 2 blocks after the S-H, which of course, you know, covers up, you know, bullshit. But, so you know, there's like a little lag time. So it requires a little bit of, you know, involvement in it, I think. Although that's, you know, more readily available.
So is that might be it. Is everybody here, this is just our class now, isn't it? Is that right? Okay. Except for Beverly, who's an honorary member of our class. Okay, so it's about 3:25. Do we want to chat a little bit more with Kay? I thought would be really interesting for me right now, and I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I would like to show Kay some works and have her respond. I'd like to show her Brian Kim Steffen's Dream Life of Letters, and maybe some works of concrete poetry, or a little fragment of Hollis Frampton Zorn's Lemma, which, you know, is a film that kind of paces through some things. Just some things, just to simply elicit your reaction, if that's
Fine.
you know,
You mean
Rorschach.
here, or-
Yeah, we can do it right here.
Oh, okay.
On the screen, a little Rorschach to try to get into your mind.
I feel like I'm doing crits. Like, I have to think so fast.
No, but it's in your field. Does that sound okay for a few minutes, and then maybe we can break early?
Should we come down here?
Yeah, why don't you go sit in the audience and I'll steer, I'll drive up here. Zach, can we get the computer on?
So you want me to go down here?
So yeah, you can just close all that and open up either Safari or Firefox. But don't close that. No. But yeah, if you go down at the taskbar of Firefox.
Do we have sound coming from the computer? Actually, I'm not so